Hey everyone, it's Matt Gordon here with the Hidden Hockey Podcast. It's been about a month since I last posted, so I'm very excited to get into some post-World Juniors talk and then also talk about the most recent midseason rankings that came out from NHL Central Scouting. We're going to go ahead and break through each of these things. So if you have any questions or you're new to the channel, do yourself a favor, leave your questions off to the side. I'm going to get to different Q&A questions as I can through the video. But what, kind of how the format of the live stream is going to go will be this. So I'm going to talk about each of the four different rankings that Central Scouting has come out with first. Starting with the North American skaters, then moving on to the international skaters, then moving on from there to the North American goalies and finishing with the international goalies. After that, I'll get into a little bit more of the World Juniors, kind of my thoughts from the World Juniors, what prospects really shined, what draft eligibles really came out of this tournament. And kind of go from there and talk about, where I think some of these prospects are at. And then we'll have a little Q&A session at the end, should we get any from the chat. Or if you leave any comments in the video after this stream has been put up, feel free to let me know in the comments if you have any questions, any thoughts, different things like that. Love to talk with all of you. Very excited to talk more with you guys about prospects. And, it's been great to see the channel grow a lot. It's up to 285 subscribers now. So it's great to see that. And hoping to see a little bit more coming into the draft season and when it will get a little more heavy in terms of content from my perspective. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the North American skaters. So I'm going to share my screen so that way you guys can see the ratings as I see them as well. So we're going to go ahead here. We got the North American skaters here off to the side, and obviously first and foremost we'll talk about Gavin McKenna. With Gavin McKenna, obviously this last week or two since the World Juniors and in the World Juniors, I thought he had a very good performance. I know he's drawn some criticism for some lackadaisical efforts and different things. He's also shown some immaturity in some different moments at the World Juniors, but I think a lot of people have to remember that this kid's a draft eligible playing in the World Juniors. The fact that he's even there is an accomplishment in itself, and that goes for anybody on this list. To be a draft eligible and be in the World Juniors is more the exception than the rule. As you know, it's a very, very heavy 19-year-old tournament. So any 17 or 18-year-old that's really making an impact in the World Junior tournament, that alone should be something that they're really done. On top of that, he's playing NCAA hockey at Penn State, pretty good program, but obviously not the Boston Universities, not the Boston Colleges, the U of M's, the MSU's. He's not in that vein in terms of, I don't think he is maybe as highly thought of as he was before just because of, some of the warts he's shown through the year. But I'm still seeing this kid as the number one prospect in this class. And has the gap closed a little bit on him? I would say that it has, but I wouldn't say that it's insurmountable for him to overcome and rebuild that gap again. I think he's done really well since the World Juniors in the NCAA. In the NCAA hockey. I think he will have a very good second half to the year. We can't forget the elite skill set he has, great playmaking, really good shot, offensive awareness through the charts. Defensively, for the most part, pretty responsible. He does have his moments where he kind of cheats and focuses more on his offense, but he's a younger kid. Again, he just turned 18. So, there's a lot of time for him to grow within himself and find himself as a hockey player. But he's worth betting on the upside. To me, he's still far and away the number one pick for this year's draft. Going here to the number two here for North American skaters, Keaton Verhoff. He had an interesting World Juniors as well. His season so far has been pretty good. But Keaton, I think, it's finding the kind of the framework of what he will be as a hockey player. The top pairing upside is still there for sure. I think he's adjusted to North Dakota's defense really well. A couple of viewings I've had of him, I think he has shown that he's going to be an elite quality player. I think his value will be had more towards this part of the season. I think he's finding himself still in the college level. And at the World Juniors, I think he did struggle a little bit. I wouldn't say that he was having a bad performance by any means, though. I think he was somebody when he had to step in the middle of the tournament, I thought he really acclimated himself quite well. I think there was a lot that he could have, I think a lot he gleaned from the tournament, but also a lot that he learned from the tournament. And that's great to see. Obviously there's a lot of different things that, you can see out of Keaton Verhoff and kind of the projectability with him. He's closer to 6'4", as you can see on the verified height and weight there from Central Scouting. Being 6'4" and 210 and not really being 18 years old yet is a lot of really good things to see out of a prospect. And then having him play in the NCAA, be one of the youngest players in the NCAA this year, is something that you can definitely put your hat towards. I do think right now, currently, I have him at 3. I think he's probably going to be 3. I don't know that he will be somebody that will fit into the 2 slot anymore. I think Stenberg has done too much to close the gap, in my opinion. Some would argue that Reed should be in that conversation too, and a few others. But for me, I think Verhoff's a solid 3. I think he's properly rated here by NHL Central Scouting for North American skaters. And it'll be very interesting to see what he's able to do. But this is a kid who's a number 1 defenseman, somebody who I think has a lot of growing still to do as a prospect. But that being said, he's already a very mature 17, nearly 18-year-old kid. And to see him have some level of success at the college level is really just a tip to his development and really what he's been able to do this year. Carson Carell's here at 3. For me, I'm going to preface this by saying I love Carson Carell's game. I think he's a very, very talented player. I think he should be a little bit lower on this list. I think he's probably closer to like 8 or 9 for me out of this grouping of prospects. I think the offensive upside is limited with Carson Carell's. I think he's a very good puck transporter. I think he's got a great first pass. But once he gets in the offensive zone, I don't know that he necessarily has the high-end offensive attributes that a lot of these guys need to have to be successful power play guys. I think he's a guy who's a very good even strength offensive player. He's one of the best defenders in this draft, bar none. Really good at gap control, really good at managing his stick, blocking passing lanes, blocking shots where needed. Good overall mobility, four-way, and straight line skating as well. But Carson to me is a little bit richly rated here. I would argue that he will be a guy who should be absolutely no question in my mind in the first round. Whether or not he should be top 15, a lot of people, and I would say the majority, think he should be top 15. I'm inclined to think with the quality of the class, he's probably closer to like 16 to 20 for me. And like I said, I like this kid as a prospect. I think he's a very talented prospect. But I think a lot of people are overcompensating for not seeing him earlier. And I've had a lot of views on this kid. I've seen probably 6 or 8 games of his. The progression's been very solid for sure, but I don't know that I see, a top 10 pick out of Carson Carell's just yet. I think he's a very, very gifted player, but the offensive ability, I think, is a little more limited than I would like to see out of a guy who I would pick in the top 10. Going here now to Chase Reed at 4. For me, Chase Reed is absolutely a top 10 pick. He's really, really been my biggest riser on my board this year. Just looking at the way he played at the World Juniors, I thought he played excellent, particularly in the game against Sweden. I thought he was a force for being, stepping up when, Hudson went down. I thought Chase Reed ate up a lot of minutes. I thought he was quality in terms of how he handled himself out there. Really good first pass. A little bit shaky at times, but again, that's a draft eligible playing in a really superior tournament. I thought he was excellent there. His OHL play so far this year has been dominant. I think he's been super impressive on both sides of the puck. Really good offensively, very good on the power play. Scoring goals at a premium as a defenseman in the OHL is, not something to shake your hat at. Obviously Zane Parekh just broke 30 goals last year, but that was a very rare occurrence. Chase Reed's going to probably be a 20-goal scorer this year in the OHL as a draft eligible, which is really impressive. And then given if he's able to then maybe step into the NCAA next year and play for Michigan State, that's going to be a really good development track for him. He'll probably be following the likes of, guys like John Michael Lyles, Artem Levshinov, various others that have played for Michigan State. Really just a guy to really watch and look at. But, Chase for me is probably really appropriately rated here for North American skaters. I have him, I think, is like my 4th or 5th North American in my personal ranking. But, and I think he's definitely a top 5, potentially top, probably more so top 10 pick, but definitely a guy who I could see, rising and getting into the top 5. Going now into Caleb Malhotra here at 5. I do think that with Caleb Malhotra, you have a player that's a very skilled player, really great straight line skater. To me, though, I don't know. I think there's a little bit of recency bias here with Caleb Malhotra. A very good player, definitely a first rounder. Again, similar to Corrales, somebody I think is really leaning on the recent viewings of him, and I think he struggled a little bit in the BCHL last year, if I'm being honest. I think he was somebody who really found his game a little bit more towards the latter half of the season. The BCHL has really found his game in the OHL this year, which is leading him to rise up as much as he has. But I don't know that I see 70, 80 point upside out of Caleb Malhotra. And I feel like in order for him to be a top 10 pick, he should have that upside based on the quality of this class. Where other prospects are coming out and what other prospects are doing. Caleb to me is a guy who I think could be a really good player in the National Hockey League. Obviously, there's the bloodlines with Manny Malhotra being his dad and an NHL assistant coach. So he knows what it takes to make the National Hockey League. The hit rate on this kid is incredibly high. He will definitely make the National Hockey League. That's not a question. It's just a question of whether or not is he more of a second line center or is he a guy that could take a top line position in the NHL? And I don't know that he is that guy. I think he's more the second line, really elite third line player. So Caleb is a guy who I think has really done well for himself this year. I just question a little bit about the upside. And, he's had an excellent season. He's proven to everybody he will be a National Hockey League player. It's just a matter of when. But for me here, I think he's probably in the same vein that I have Corrales. I think Malhotra, both of them should be picked pretty similarly. Moving here now to Daxton Rudolph. Daxton Rudolph's a guy who, to be honest, I think I look at him similarly to Corrales. I think he's a little bit less for me. I have him on the fringe of being in the first round. So for me, having him here at 6, I don't know that I see top 20 upside with Daxton Rudolph. Will somebody probably pick him in the top 20? Absolutely. But, with Daxton Rudolph, I think, the skating is really impressive. I think he's actually even a better skater than Corrales is. Really good physically as well. I think he's somebody who really engages well in the defensive zone, very good on leaning on guys, maintaining and utilizing his, size and space very well for a high-end prospect. And I think there's still some growth here. He could be a guy who's 6'3" and 215 by the time he hits the National Hockey League and really strong in that, that weight too. And that is a really valued asset in the National Hockey League. So I can see the first round ranking for him. And, I think there's more to see out of Daxton though. And I'm expecting the second half to be something that, should show whether or not he's going to be a top 15 guy or will he fall closer to the 30s. He's probably somewhere in the middle there, in my opinion, but it should be really interesting to see where he's able to go and what he's able to do going forward in the second half of the season. Tynan Lawrence, the guy who's had the most recent attention here. He's listed here at 7. I'm inclined to think he's probably safely in that spot right now based on how he's played in the NCAA. He has struggled a little bit to acclimate to Boston University. I did watch his first game. I was a little bit concerned with some of the habits he had in the NCAA level, but they're not things he can't unlearn. You get a really high octane, high end offensive player. I think he's somebody when the moment matters and the game is in a really crucial stretch of the game, he steps up and he does well. Was a really key factor for Muskegon last year in the USHL playoffs, leading them to their Clark Cup championship. But with Tynan Lawrence, there's still some growth and room here. He's somebody who is still a little bit, I wouldn't call him raw because he's not raw, but there's some development still to be had in his game to really truly reach his upside. And, he's definitely a worthwhile bet. To me, he's going to be a real rangy guy for me because I think some team could pick him in the top 5 if they really like him. There's rumors apparently the Vancouver Canucks have a lot of interest in Tynan Lawrence. And if that's the case, obviously they'll be picking higher. Could he fall to 10 or 12 if he struggles in the NCAA? I think he could. It's just a matter of how his season will develop going forward. But I really like the player. I think he's somebody who, I have a lot of time for and watching him play. And I think you can use, I think he's a guy you can stash, a couple years even in the NCAA and really allow him to flourish offensively, find his game and really make sure that he's able to do the right things out there, and kind of grow his game a little bit. And, I think Tynan will find his game. He'll eventually get to where he needs to be, but there's a really, really intelligent hockey player, a really smart hockey player, and a guy who will develop into a National Hockey League player probably sooner rather than later. But the smart man's money would be to give him 2 or 3 years, post-draft to really get his game and become a really impact NHL hockey player. I talked about this guy a lot. on the channel before, but Ilya Morozov here at 8. This is definitely the highest I've ever seen him. I've had him, and if anybody's paid attention to my preseason top 20, I've had this guy in my first round for a while now. I thought he was really good and really impressive in the USHL, and now he's come into Miami of Ohio and being a major factor for them. I think he's a tremendous hockey player, somebody who, there's still so much to chisel out of this kid developmentally. Great frame. I think he's really smart offensively and defensively, really always on top of his routes, finding ways to make himself impactful, good hands too as well. His passing, I think he play makes, but I think there's still more within his game. And I mean, this kid's 3 years removed from playing 16U hockey, like at a high end level. Like he was playing in Russia the year before. Like you look at his elite prospects, there's not much information out there on him. This is a guy who's rapidly ascended up boards for a long time. And I think he went from relative unknown as a 16-year-old to a complete superstar here this year. I think he, to me, will be an impact NHLer. It's just he's a development person's dream because he's kind of tabula rasa. There's still really intriguing attributes to him, but I think he's still learning how to be a really impactful pro. And, given what he's done at the college level already as a freshman, he's by far the youngest player in college hockey right now. Next year will still be one of the younger players in college hockey, but I have a lot of time for Ilya Morozov. I think he's somebody who, to me, could see himself 8 or 10 even. I don't know. I mean, looking at him right now based on the quality here, I think, Central probably values him at 12 to 15. I personally have him at 18 on my board. I think that's a safe spot, but I do see him potentially rising out of that position. And maybe even being a top 15, maybe even top 12 pick. But he's a guy who, again, a development person's dream, has a lot of really good base level attributes to his game. And I think there's just more to unlock with Ilya Morozov. This was a guy here, Ethan Belchetz, somebody who I personally thought would be much higher on this list. You just don't see guys that are 6'5", 220 and scoring a point per game at the OHL level and I can't see him not being in the top 10. I have him even in my top 5. I think he's somebody who the scouts eventually, when you put everything on the table and you see what's given there and you don't put a name towards that kid at all, you're picking him top 5, in my opinion. And I think Ethan Belchetz has been slept on in the public scouting community. I think in, the internal circles of the NHL, I would argue that a lot of people have him probably higher rated than you see publicly. And, for me, I personally see him that way as well. You just don't see guys that are that big and that offensively skilled that often. I think it's not fair to call him like a Lindros guy. He's not that at all. But I do think he's a very impactful player. You can look at a guy like Ilya Protas or Alexei Protas, for example. Both of those guys are big guys that use their framework really well, but are also offensive contributors as well. I would expect that Belchetz will obviously play next year in the OHL as well. I don't know that he's NCAA ready yet. He's somebody who, again, could be a long-term guy, but if he stays in the OHL next year and plays for Windsor or maybe gets moved to a different team, but I would expect him to play in Windsor. This is a guy who I think could be a top 5 scorer next year in the OHL, should he decide he wants to stay in the, and do that instead. There's just a lot to like with him. I think, good skating, size is obviously there, really elite shot. I think one of the better shots in this draft, actually. I think he's still learning how to score in the OHL. I think he's finding his game a little bit better, I think, in recent weeks. But with Ethan, I think there's a really, really good upside with Ethan Belchetz. And then going on here now to JP Hurlburt here at 10. And then I'll talk about Oscar Hemming too in the same vein. Herbert had a really good start to the season. He's tapered off a little bit for Kamloops, but somebody who, the offensive upside's clearly there in spades. I look at him similarly to, I think he's somebody who I'm not going to make a comparable for JP because I don't know if there's a fair one. But there's a lot of offensive creativity. I think I think he's the best brute scorer out of smaller guys in this draft. He's not somebody that just sits on the perimeter. I think he's actually got a really good and tight scoring ability. I would argue most of his goals are, shots from afar or, they're in tight rebounds that he just knocks in and fights through lanes to get through. He's somebody who I think all facets is going to be a guy who will be an impact contributor for the University of Michigan eventually. I think that's next year probably. He'll probably step out and do that. But he's growing in size too. I didn't realize he's already 6 foot. So, I look over at the screen here. I had some notes, but he's 6 foot. That's really impressive. I think he's still, maybe he grows another inch. I don't know. But if he does, I think that will help scouts to really put him closer to the top 10. Because right now they're probably sitting on him at 15. But, to me, he's right around fringe top 10 for me. I think there's a lot to like with his game, and I think he's still unlocking a lot of things at the junior level and will eventually lock them at the college level. And then Oscar Hemming, he's been the wild card here. Obviously, I'm very surprised that Central Scouting put him here at 11. They probably got one viewing of him right before the midterm rankings came out and must have really liked what he did at the NCAA level. It is impressive to see what he's been able to do. Obviously, the circumstances he had with Kiku Espu is something that no prospect wants to go through. Obviously, there's a lot of circumstances with that, and I've talked about it on my X feed. But I think he's somebody who, given the circumstances, obviously really worked hard to get himself at the NCAA level, and obviously has shown very nicely so far in the limited time he's been able to play for Boston College. He's definitely already been an impact player for them. Bigger guy here at 6'4" and closer to 200 pounds. Good overall skill set package that he has in terms of, size, speed, skill, tenacity, willingness to adapt to the college and pro ranks, I think is there in spades. But I think he's a lot of projection right now. I think there's some really good things you're seeing, a lot of emerging things that are coming out of his game. By the time draft day hits, he's probably going to be a top 10 pick. It wouldn't surprise me at all, actually, to see him there. I think he's somebody who I think has still a lot of intrigue and a lot of mystery around him. But there's a really, really good hockey player here in Oscar Hemming. I'm going to get into a couple more guys here, and then maybe just highlight a few others. So Adam Novotny here. With Adam Novotny, I'm not the biggest fan of him, I'm going to be honest. I think he's somebody who I look at him like a Dalibor Dvorsky, somebody who will eventually make the National Hockey League, but I don't know that he's going to be a super impact player in the National Hockey League. I think there's too many junior habits in his game. I don't think he's offensively as gifted as people make him out to be. I think he limits himself quite a bit in terms of, making the safe play. Maybe not enough. I think there's times where he goes for too much, high-end level skill plays when he probably could just make a simple play. I don't know that he is somebody who really jumps off the page for me anytime I've watched him. Every time I've watched him, he's been kind of the third or fourth best player I watch on the ice. And for me, I don't see first-round quality out of him. I think he's probably a guy. Will somebody take him in the first round? Probably. Should he be taken in the first round? I would argue no. But I think with Adam, he's found himself now. He really struggled in the Czech league, came over to North America, has done pretty well in the OHL level, but I don't know that he's flashing first round offense for me. And that's just kind of a point I have on Adam. Ryan Lynn here at 13. He's, to me, I think, been severely underrated in the scouting community. Ryan Lynn, to me, is without a doubt a top 15 pick in this draft. I had him I can see where people don't have him in the top 5. I don't know that he does that for me personally. But there is definitely a high-end skill set to this kid. I don't care that he's, 5'11". A lot of people, as you see with Lane Hudson and various others, we have this weird size bias with Ryan Lynn, but then we don't have it with Xavier Villanueva. The people pick and choose the guys they want to look at because they see somebody similar to, Hudson or different things like that. And I think Ryan Lynn is a much more impactful NHLer than Xavier Villanueva is. And I think that's just based on the same skill sets. They're both similar players, but Ryan is by far and away, I think, the smarter player. I think Xavier is a guy who's a rover a little bit, is a little bit too wild cardish in my opinion. I don't know that he's as polished as Lane Hudson was when I watched him in his draft year. And Ryan, to me, fits that scheme. Now, is Ryan Lynn going to have the impact that Lane Hudson has? I would say no. I think he's going to be more of a second pairing guy with good power play mechanics and good ability to make an impact on your power play. But, that's still a very valued asset, regardless of how small he is. Now, whether or not you value him between, 8, let's say, to 20, that's, I guess, more of how the draft's going to play out. But, if it's me picking, I'm probably picking him in the top 12 easy. I have him personally at 10. I'm inclined to think that he could rise a little bit, but I do think he will be, unfortunately, tethered to this reality of smaller guys not receiving the impact that they deserve. And that's been a thing that's throughout scouting. That's not anything I'm telling you that anybody listening on this channel wouldn't already understand or know. But I do think with Rhineland, he's more the exception than the rule. All right, let's go into here. We got a few other guys here. I talked about Xavier Villeneuve. I'm going to talk to about like 20 or so. Or I'll talk about Klepov and Shilov and Rogowski, and then I'm going to kind of just roll through the rest here. If you guys have questions on the guys underneath that, let me know, but I'll get more into the international skaters in a minute. With Brooks Rogowski, this is obviously a massive kid, 6'7", 230, played at Detroit Catholic Central in high school and then moved over to the OHL level. I seen him in a little bit in high school just from some small viewings I had on him, and then saw probably a game or two for Brooks Rogowski. This is purely a projection pick, in my opinion, for him to be this high. A lot of people like him in the first round. I don't know that I see first-round quality out of Brooks Rogowski either. There's, I think, probably 10 or 12 OHLers I've seen this year that do a lot more for me than Brooks does. That being said, though, really good overall game he has. I don't know if he checks enough for a guy that size. Like, he doesn't really use his size as much as I'd like him to. I've seen moments where he has, but they come to me few and far in between. I watch a lot of Red Wings games. He reminds me a lot, and obviously they're not similar players by any means, but their mentality in terms of how they approach their physicality. I look at a guy like Elmer Soderblom, a guy who doesn't necessarily use his framework and his size to the ability he needs to. I think with Brooks, he's a very good player. I think he leverages space well using his size, but I don't know that he leans on people and he's using his physical gifts enough to make me think he's going to produce offense more at the National Hockey level. I think he's going to be interesting because he might be a guy who, if his offensive ability really takes off, he might find himself in a third line role. But I don't know. I see more of a Brian Boyle projection for Brooks Rogowski. Was Brian Boyle picked in the first round? He was. But I think he's going to be picked in the first round for the same reasons that Brian Boyle was. A guy you're probably going to want to let stew for a few years. He'll probably play college hockey, just to even get more strong and more physical. But I don't know that I see super high-end offense out of Brooks Rogowski. I don't know that I even see second-level play out of Rogowski at the pro level. I think he's going to be a guy who should be, I look at him like a Brian Boyle. Another guy I kind of look at too, if he can improve his face-offs and become more of a special teams guy, I would look at Paul Gaustad as another guy that you would want to see him look like, just given his skill set and his ability. I think he's probably more that vein than he is a high offensive contributor. And then two other guys I want to talk about here. I want to talk about them kind of together because I view them very similarly. Nikita Klepov and Yegor Shilov. With Klepov, I think he is more of a well-rounded prospect than Shilov is. I think he's the guy who's very defensively responsible, good skater, not the biggest burner out there in the world, but I think he's an above-average skater overall. I think his edge work is very impressive. I think his speed his speed and acceleration, I think, could be a little bit more, but that could be worked through. I think he's somebody who, high offensive creator, really good at managing, and getting in tight and scoring goals in those ways. I think he breaks up a lot of passes is something I noticed too. Very good at reading lanes, very good at managing the neutral zone as well. I think he's a guy who, to me, obviously he's a true winger in my opinion. I don't ever see any center upside from him. But he's somebody who I think has done really well at the OHL level, been a key factor for Saginaw, and I've never caught a viewing of his I didn't love. And then Igor Shilov here, he's somebody who I'm higher on than most. I have him in my top 10. I think he's somebody who, I think because he's in the queue and playing in Victoriaville, he's been extremely slept on. Him and Vlasov both of them have been incredibly dynamic. Shilov, though, in particular, really good straight line skater. I think is one of the better accelerators in this draft. I think he's somebody who, given his offensive ability, he scores and play makes probably up there with some of the best in this draft. I wouldn't put him in the McKenna category of playmaker or scorer, but he's probably a tier or two below that. I think he will be somebody who comes in the National Hockey League and is actually probably scoring more frequently at younger ages than most prospects would, just because I think the offensive talent and the IQ is off the charts. And he's going to be somebody who he will adapt very well to guys who are high-end offensive creators as well. Having a guy like that on his line will be somebody who I think that'll be very important for Shilov to find as he goes into his pro career. But Shilov, to me, he's again a guy who I really have a ton of time for as a prospect. I think he's got an incredible upside. And he might be a guy that pots 90 a couple years, down the line. Like, he's just got that kind of flair to his game, that kind of unique ability that, is hard to really scout and find, actually. You can look at guys that are high-end skill contributors, but you're not really sure if they're going to adapt that way to the pro level. I think Shilov, to me, is a seamless transition there. Defensively, is there some work he has? I would say that he still is got to find that a little bit more. I wouldn't call him irresponsible by any means in the defensive zone, but I do think he's prone to maybe overcompensating for offense at times. He's gotten burned a few times, like a couple plays not leading to goals, but like one time definitely led to a goal, just because he's more eager to guard the point than he is maybe to drop low and really kind of cover some passing lanes down low when he probably should have maybe been with his guy. But Shilov is a guy who, again, really, really slept on right now. And I think I would put him as the top 5 offensive contributor in this draft. With the defensive game still kind of learning how to be, better in that way. Some other guys here that I'm going to just kind of briefly go over here. We got a ton of guys here. If you have any questions, leave them in the side here and I'll talk more about them. There's some guys on here I haven't seen, obviously. But for the most part, I went over kind of the top 16, 17 here. But I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I'm going to go now to the international skaters now. So let me go ahead and share this real quick. You don't have to see my ugly mug. I'm going to go ahead and roll here now to I went back to here. I'm going to share that tab instead. So let me go ahead here. We got the international skaters here. I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about a few of these guys here. I'll talk first about Ivor Stenberg. With Stenberg, I was pleasantly surprised by his World Juniors. I thought he was a really, really great player for Sweden. I thought he really stood out in quite a few games here at the World Juniors. Really impressed by how much better his in-tight stick handling has gotten. I think when I first watched him at the pro level this year, I thought he was good, but I did wonder whether or not he was getting out-bodied, out-physicaled. I thought he wasn't as confident as he looked at the junior and international levels. But then watching him here at the World Juniors with some pro games in him and showing that success before he went to the World Juniors, I thought he really took another step developmentally through that tournament. He, to me, was very impressive. I thought he acquitted himself very well against the best juniors in the world, despite being a draft eligible. I thought I saw a little bit more high offensive creativity and definitely some times where he was really brought in by two defensemen and really kind of limited in the space he had. And then he made a play that you looked and you were like, wow, I can't believe he made that. I was really impressed by him. I thought to me, he made a case for being number one in my opinion. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. I think he probably is my two. I mean, he is my two right now, but, given what he does the rest of this year and what he's able to contribute, I mean, the sky's the limit for your Ivor. I think he's somebody who I have immense amount of time for because you don't see guys develop and be as impactful. And obviously, he's putting in record numbers here at the SHL level as a 17-year-old. Like, I mean, sorry, 18-year-old now. But, I mean, there's not a lot to say that hasn't already been said about Ivor. I think he's somebody who, he will continue to show what he's been able to show. And, barring injury or anything like that, I mean, he's the only guy I think who is a legitimate chase to Chase McKenna. But I think it's also going to take a McKenna downfall for him to really jump over McKenna. But he's definitely put himself in that conversation, and that's a credit to him and what they've been able to do in Frölunda to develop him as well. Another guy here, got Albert Smeets. Obviously a darling of a lot of people that like risers. He's having a similar ascension to what Moritz Seider had in his draft year. I'm inclined to think that Smeets again. I felt the same way about Seider going into the draft, and he obviously proved me wrong. I still have that feeling about Smeets here as well. I don't know that I see top pairing upside out of Smeets. I think he's a very good skater. I think he's an excellent gap control guy. I think his reads can be hit and miss. I think when he makes really good reads, he makes some incredible plays, but he's prone to a lot of gaffes as well. I thought he played well at the World Juniors. I didn't expect him to be off the charts outstanding at the World Juniors. I thought he met where I was expecting him to be. He was definitely Latvia's best defenseman, no question. He was going to always be that. Thought his skating showed really well. I thought he's a burner for sure. I think but he's not somebody who you look at and go, wow, he's a quick, accelerating, fast guy. He's just a constant above average skater. Like, he just constantly wills himself into situations he shouldn't, because he's maintaining speed so well and manages the leg power and the leverage he has. Probably the best in this draft in terms of that. Really good at leveraging his overall frame. You can see why he's adapted so well at the Finnish pro level because of that, because he's really understood what his body is capable of doing, where he's able to lean on players, where he's able to look at other guys and kind of roll into his game, things that will really project to a very good shutdown capability as a defenseman. And that's what Mo Seider really learned how to do going into the pro ranks. He obviously went into the SHL and really learned and had, tons of videos before he made the NHL. And I think that's why Detroit left him there for a little bit longer, was for him to really physically feel confident. And if Smeets can find that and be really that level at the NHL level, I mean, he will have a 15-year career, no question. As far as where I have Smeets, a lot of people are saying he could be number one, all this stuff. And no, that's not at all the case. Is he a top 10 guy? You could argue that. I personally have him probably closer to 14, 15. I don't see this, like, 2 for me here out of international skaters is pretty bullish. I think he's probably 5 or 6. But I don't see second best European player out of this class. I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about another guy that I think is definitely should be in this 2 slot. But we'll get into that in a minute. Oliver Suvanto here. I have probably the least amount of viewings on him comparatively to some of these other high-end guys. But what I've seen of him is actually really impressive. I think he's somebody who I didn't find him to be outstanding at the World Juniors, but he's also draft eligible. I thought he acquitted himself well. I didn't see disappointing performances out of him. In fact, I thought I saw one of the more defensively responsible draft eligibles out of this tournament. But I think with Suvanto, the thing that I struggle with him is he looks like he's heavy-footed. I don't see a burner out of Suvanto, but I see a guy who's very, very smart. I think the same way about Merniks. I think both guys are very, very talented offense. They're both guys who, they're not offense. I wasn't getting an offense, but very defensively responsible guys. I think they're good at, they win a lot of board battles. They both find ways to do things very simply, and really, I don't think there's a lot of sexy in his game, but I think there's a lot of really good stability within his game. And that's an important attribute to have as a pro, and I think it's eventually something that's going to be his calling card at the National Hockey League level. But there's a lot to like here with Suvanto. I think he's somebody who He's kind of coming under the radar a little bit later. Same with Smeets, but he's done well in Finland. I think he's done really well at the pro level. I value him probably closer to like 17 to 22. I don't have him being this high, but definitely a first round candidate, no question. I think he's somebody who I thought did really well in terms of where I thought his game was. And it's good to see that. I think there's more. I still want to get more views on Suvanto. He's probably somebody I need to learn a little bit more about. So I'm really going off initial impressions from what I have with Suvanto. So maybe more viewings will unlock some different things out of what I see out of his game. But I thought there was a lot to like in the limited amount of time I've seen him. Elton Hermansen, I haven't really got a ton of views on him, but internationally, I've been very impressed with him overall too. I think his shot is really impressive. One of the better shots in this draft. He's heavy shooter. You watch his pucks and most guys look like they're shooting pucks. He looks like he's shooting boulders. Like he's just got a heavy shot that beats goaltenders constantly. A guy who I think takes really, really smart offensive routes. One of the better forecheckers in this draft. Whether or not that leads to offensive opportunity, it really just depends on the game you're watching him in, but, definitely has some checking line attributes for sure. I think he's one of the better, more advanced checkers in this draft. And somebody who I think could really do well on an NHL penalty kill, in my opinion. But there's some more I'd like to see out of him. I think he should be in the SHL, in my opinion. But him playing in the Allsvenskan, playing for Modo, isn't a bad thing. Modo is a really good development program. We've clearly seen what they've come out with, over the given years. So it's not a bad thing to be playing for Modo. I just think that he might find himself developing a little bit better at the SHL level, in my opinion. But we'll see what comes out of that. Viggo Bjork here. To me, honestly, the best draft eligible out of that World Juniors tournament. He made some unbelievable playmaking passes. Any doubts anybody has about this kid, throw him out the door. Like, I don't care that he's 5'10". I don't care that he had to struggle a little bit at the pro level. You can't teach what Viggo Bjork has. You just can't. Like, he's so offensively gifted. His playmaking ability is right under McKenna, in my opinion. Him and Bjork are two and far away the best playmakers in this draft. I thought he was dominant at the World Juniors. Like, just insane passes from corners, cross-ice passes that were beautifully seamed. Like, you can't teach the offense this kid has. Like, you just can't. And he's going to make an NHL power play by the time he's 20. He's going to be probably one of the better power play contributors in the National Hockey League when it's all said and done. Just a tremendous, tremendous hockey player. Are the feet a little heavy? Sometimes they are, but I mean, he's a transporter by trade. Like, he just gets pucks, gets him to where he needs to go, moves to the speed he needs to, but he controls pace in his game so well. I don't understand the qualms a lot of people have of them. I really don't. Like, he's high-end offensive creativity in spades. He's got a great ability to play defensively as well. Really good at managing. He probably had about 6 or 7 pass breakups across pro level and World Juniors that I've seen this year that I like to next to that's an NHL play. Like, people look at him and I think just size queen him immediately. But Viggo Bjork, I mean, you cannot underestimate how talented this kid is. And to me, he's in my top 5, no question. I've been arguing this all season. He is a guy who should be really highly valued here throughout this draft season. I think he's better than Tynan Lawrence. I think he's better than Ethan Belchetz. I think he's better than a lot of guys that are put above him. To have him in your 20s, to me, I don't think you're really watching this class as much as you should be. There's no way there's 20 prospects better than this kid. Not in any. I don't even think there's 10 prospects better than Viggo Bjork. You have to just trust your eyeballs sometimes and not look at all these attributes. I think sometimes we're overanalyzing and overlooking at different situations with these kids. You just got to let the play speak for itself. This is a kid who's a top 5 prospect, in my opinion, no question. I don't understand people that don't have him top 5. I think it's more about them than it is about Figo Bjork. Some other guys here. I'll get a little bit in here into Pipparainen and Nordmark, and then I'm going to kind of bounce here a little bit more through this list. But any other questions, feel free to leave them on the side. Obviously have some guys popping in and out. If you comment it later in the video, feel free to do so as well. But let's look here at Juho Pipparainen. I think he's a little richly rated here. Pipparainen, to me, I think didn't really do a lot for me at the World Juniors. I'm going to be brutally honest. I think he was fine. I didn't think he played bad. I just don't know that I saw, I don't know if I saw first rounder. I'll be honest. I think he's somebody who I think he could use a lot more development in the Finnish Elite League. I think could he stand to maybe move to a higher level? Sure. I don't think he's going to ever go to the NCAA. He'll get his finishing school at the pro level. He'll probably move to the AHL at some point. And then he'll get into the National Hockey League, but I don't see top pairing upside out of Pipparainen. I think he's more of a second. I think he's more of a 4, in my opinion. I don't think he's even a 3. I think he's somebody who will supplement your offense. I think he's got some smart game to him. I think he's really good at simple passes. I think he transports pretty well for a younger player. I think there's still some growth there, but I don't know if I see super high-end capabilities out of him. I think he's just a fine player. I think he's somebody who will probably make the National Hockey League, but there's a chance he might not. I mean, I look at him similar like an Esa Lindell. I think he's that kind of player, which is a good player. I mean, Esa Lindell's a quality guy. He's played 8-10 years in the league. Pipparainen will probably do that. But I don't know. I don't know if I see really – I think there's 17, 18 kids in this draft that could be 10-year players in the National Hockey League. And I think that's even conservative. Pipparainen to me is probably right on the fringe of the first round, in my opinion. I don't know that I see, him at 6 here is a little rich for my blood. But some people really value him, and that's more so, I guess, preference at that point. But I don't know that I agree with a lot of it. But hey, it's up to Juho to prove me wrong. Obviously, he doesn't need to tell me what he can or can do. His development will show that, but that's kind of my overall thought on that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit here about Marcus Nordmark. Nordmark to me is a big conundrum. He reminds me a lot of Phil Kessel in terms of a really gifted offensive player, but he has some habits that I don't love. I think his offensive game is really, really impressive. On the power play, very few that can do what he does on a given night. I think his handles and his dangles in terms of his high-end stick handling moves he makes, up there with the best in the draft. But I do find that he doesn't back check as well as he should. I do find that he's not able to really do some really responsible things in the defensive zone. You will never put this guy in your penalty kill. You'll definitely put him on your power play, though. I would limit his minutes quite a bit. But the high offensive ability, in his prime, he's a 60, 70-point National Hockey League player. But you got to understand and realize that the sacrifice defensively will have to come with his offense. I look at him, I compared him a little bit to William Nylander. I think William Nylander was more defensively responsible, but the offensive creativity at the junior level is right up there with William Nylander. And with that being said, I think Nordmark to me is probably top 12 guy in this draft. But he's the biggest risk factor, I think, out of the guys that I see in the top 15. There is a chance he will bust. It's just a matter of, can his offensive ability really come through? Is he willing to be defensively responsible? And will the effort be there on every given game at every given occasion? There will be times where he's scratched. There will be times where he's not able to do the things he says he's going to do. But can you live with that if he puts up 3 points on a given night in a really important game? That's going to be your qualm and your situation you got to look at with Marcus Nordmark. I'm going to get a sip real quick, and then I'll go more into some prospects here. Then we got a couple defensemen here. We can look at Malte Gustafsson, and I'll talk about both these guys at the same time. Gustafson and Hawkinson, both similar guys. I'm not in love with either guy. I think both guys are low end projectables in the National Hockey League, in my opinion. I think they're both third pairing guys. Not necessarily guys who I don't think they do anything incredibly well, in my opinion. I think they do things that are good. I think you're going to be good players, but I don't know. I mean, they're kind of dime a dozen in my view. I don't know that there's high end capabilities out of either guy. I think I like Hawkinson more than I do Gustafson. I would argue that Hawkinson is probably more top 20, maybe 25. Gustafson, I think, is a second rounder. I don't know that I see him at this high end level that everybody else does. But with Hawkinson, I think he's very good at manipulating the stick. I think he also leans on guys really well. He's acclimated. I thought, honestly, defensively, he's been one of the better kind of defensive prospects. I think Phil Broberg would have really appreciated to be at the level that Hawkinson's at right now as draft eligible. I think that would have saved him a lot of development time. But with that being said, I think Hawkinson is somebody who he will take time. I think he's, defensively, he's got a lot of work still to do, but there's a lot to like, within his game and what he's able to do. And we'll see what happens going forward. But I don't know that he's more than a third pairing guy in the National Hockey League. And then with Malte Gustafsson, I think there's just too many things that I look at and I watch in his game, and I don't think he will translate as well as people think he will. I think he's going to really struggle. I think he will have probably a few years here at the SHL and AHL level. And then you're seeing him probably as a third pairing guy. He's probably going to have to be a lot more physical than he is right now. Not that he's not physical by any means. I think he does do things, with his frame pretty well. But I don't see the high offensive game. I don't think he's somebody who you're wowed by any means. So I think it's a very safe projection to have him as a third pairing guy. And I think it's more an accurate projection for him. So I don't know that I have the same love that everybody else has about him. And then I'm going to talk about a few other guys here, but I'm not going to get too in depth because I can talk more about this, if people have questions or anything like that, or if you leave any comments later in the video, I'll talk more about that. But I will get into more now of the goaltending now. I will do kind of a general overview of the goaltending. I'm not going to go too in depth here, but I just want to talk a little bit about a few guys. So let me go ahead and share my third screen here. So now we got the North American goalies here. So I'm going to talk here first about the class as a whole. The North American goaltending class to me is very weak. I think there's a few guys that really I'm going to talk about here that really stand out for me. And then I'm going to talk about maybe the top two guys here and then get into the guys I really like. So Brady Nolan, he was not good at the World Juniors. He should not have been there. There were better goaltenders that were available. He was pretty bad. Got blown up pretty bad against Sweden. Did not look like he was even remotely ready for that level. I think he's probably watching that performance, I don't even think he should be the under 18 goalie, in my opinion. I think that should go to like Carruthers or it should go to some other player. But, he's basically here because he's 6'4" and 202, but he is not shown to me a high-end offensive goaltending at all. That's where I'm going to leave that. Orsulak here, another guy doesn't really wow me either. Again, 6'4", 220, really projected kind of pick here. To me, it's two guys that people see the framework with them, but I don't think they've proven anything. And that's probably what's led to this class being valued as being a little bit weaker. But there are some diamonds in the rough I'm going to talk a little bit about here. So first guy I want to talk about is Denai Shaikov. Second-year draft eligible. Nobody really knew who this kid was because he was playing the NHL and not really even as a starter last year. He's come over to play for Gatineau and has been lights out. This is a kid who, to me, I think is the best goaltender in this draft, bar none. I don't know that I've seen high-end offensive – or I'm sorry, not high-end offensive, but I don't know if I've seen high-end, like, shift to shift movement in terms of his hip mobility is incredibly impressive. This is a guy who he is always in position. He's always at the spot he needs to be. When he gets beat, he's usually beat by, there's usually a deke or something that's involved, a really high end pass where he can't cover in space and time. But I mean, you watch him and he is a monster on pucks. Like he is just an absolute force when it comes to just looking at reads, really managing his glove hand quite well. Really good handwork. I think his shiftiness and his mobility are incredibly underrated. And I don't know why more people don't value this kid more. I think it's purely because he's 6'1", because you watch his crease movement, you watch how in tight he is. He never loses his crease. He's just, and if he does, he's usually because he's making a very high-end save or he's making something happen, a good poke check, for example, something. But he is always in spots where he needs to be. And even if he's a little late, he makes the acrobatic save look easy. More talk needs to be had on Denai Shakoff, in my opinion. He will be a guy that we will look at in a couple of years and say, why was this kid not taken earlier? I've never seen a viewing of his I didn't love. I think sky's the limit for a guy like Denai Shakoff. Some other guys to talk about here. I'm going to talk a little bit here about Xavier Went. This is a kid who played for Shattuck St. Mary. Really good player in terms of, another guy who utilizes his size pretty well. He's not the biggest guy in the world. He's, listed here 5'11" and a half. But just positionally super sound. Not as flashy as Shakoff. I think he's more stable and good in his positioning. But obviously Shattuck has produced some pretty decent goaltending here as of late. I think him and Michael Elief is another guy who probably would be more of a junior, like a USHL guy in terms of selection. But both guys to me that are very good positionally and are coming from really good programs that allow them to develop really well. And obviously he, didn't really face a ton of shots at Shattuck St. Mary. But now decided to go to the Western Hockey League level, and it shows that he was more than just a product of the system. He's been a very impressive player to watch and look at, and I got a lot of time for him. One other guy I'm going to mention here is Arvin Jaswal, the OHL goaltender for Barrie. Barrie, I really like their goaltending setup they have in Barrie. I really like Ben Harebek. I think he's a guy who should even get some consideration here for the draft. Jaswal is a guy who, he's still learning how to be a good goaltender, but he's done very well in backup duty. And then another guy I'm going to talk about here, he's not even actually ranked here, but he's played very well at the OJHL level, and that's Nico Armelin. All three of these guys have been really impressive in the times I've seen of them, more so Armelin at the OJHL level. But, Jaswal has been a very, very intriguing guy to watch. I think the game I watched of his where it really stood out to me, I think he needed like 48 saves or something crazy. But watching him, I mean, he really owned that crease and really made everything look very easy. And that's interesting considering he's a rookie. He's got a system in Barrie that is pretty good, but they're willing to let things be sacrificed for offense at times. I think he's acquitted himself very well at the OHL level. So he's a guy to watch. I think he'll be a late riser here in the draft and probably will be somebody who will find himself in the top 10 of goalies selected. And then we're going to go ahead here. I don't really have a lot of standouts from the European side. Again, I think this is a weaker class European-wise as well. There's a few guys that I have, but I'm not going to mention them just yet because I don't know that they're worth talking about given the quality of prospects I've talked about through the rest of this channel. So, and the rest of this video even. So, there's a list there. A few guys maybe that I would watch for. Selidvanov is a guy I think could be somebody who could do really well. I thought Kirkala had a pretty good World Juniors. I don't know if I see an elite goaltender there, but definitely a guy who could be a backup one day. The rest of these guys on this list, I've either not seen them or if I have seen them, I haven't been necessarily blown away by them as goaltenders. But they're also very young. Obviously goaltenders develop late. Some of these guys may be in the early stages of where they find themselves professionally. So it's hard to say with certainty about any of these guys really. But the few guys I mentioned, I really feel have really shown high value. And I mentioned them for that reason. So I'm going to go ahead here. I might talk a little bit more here about some different guys, but I'm going to leave this open now for Q&A questions. Feel free to let me know what other questions you guys have available. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the World Juniors, and if we don't have any questions by the end of the time I talk about the World Juniors, I will probably sign off. So let me just go ahead and talk a little bit about the World Juniors and what I thought, and I've talked a little bit about it already, but we'll get into it a little bit more here. So with the World Juniors, obviously, Sweden, I thought they were a really interesting team to watch. I thought they were excellent. I thought were the team that really impressed me the most. Obviously, they won and played really well. They were dominant in a lot of different facets in this tournament, and I thought their goaltending was really well. I thought Lube Hermstam and Herman Leave, I thought both did really well for the Swedes in this tournament. And, a lot of credit goes to them for the talents that they showed and what they were able to do. Given the circumstances in this tournament, I thought they really overcompensated for a lot of their lack of things. I thought they were a good, well-rounded overall team, but I didn't expect them to be gold medalists. So kudos to them and, really buying into what the coaches gave them and also just buying into their overall success. I think that a lot of credit goes to them. For the U.S. team, I think there's some disappointment. I thought this team was very good. I thought they should have been a three-peater. But they obviously had a pretty key loss that led to them not necessarily getting to where they want to be, and that you have no one to blame but themselves. Goaltending really, I thought, struggled in this tournament. I thought there were some guys that probably were left off this roster that should have been there. But I thought Kempf was the best out of the grouping. But even Nicholas Kempf is just a pretty average goaltender. So we'll see what comes out of this here, but this might be a problem for the U.S. going forward, even in the next year. I don't really see any guy that will step in as an 07 or an 08 that is going to really wow me from a goaltending perspective. They were really spoiled going from Spencer Knight to, guys like Trey Augustine and, a few others that have played over the years. I think there will be some goaltenders that probably develop in the next 12 months. So maybe there will be somebody that just blows the socks off. But I don't know that I see that right now. So that's going to be a concern for the U.S. going forward. I don't know that their goaltending is going to be there. They're always going to have high offensive creators. They're always going to have really good defensemen. But the goaltending will be probably the crux of the issue for a few years now in this tournament. Going on to Switzerland here. I mean, Switzerland was just fine. They kind of were like their country. They're just fine. Like, They didn't necessarily need to. We're never going to finish as a medalist, but I thought they played pretty well. No standouts for me really out of that group. I thought they were just a typical Swiss team. Slovakia here, I think they would be disappointed in their performance. I thought this team would acquit a little better. They were probably my biggest disappointment out of the grouping of teams here. I don't know that I saw a lot of vigor out of the team. I think they were, in the moments I seen them, there were a couple of really good players, but nobody I looked out of this class and thought, wow, like that's a guy I really would like to draft. Like in terms of draft eligibles I'm talking about, but they're the guys that are doing well, out of Slovakia or moving on. Pobasol, I thought, had a pretty good tournament. I think Cherenko had a decent tournament as well. I would think that they're going to be a class on the rise, though. I think their 08s, 09s, and 2010s are pretty impressive, at least in terms of what we've seen from kids coming over to North America and doing really well. A couple of guys have been now signed to some USHL tenders, but it should be interesting to see. They're going to be a team on the rise here in a couple of years, and I think we'll start to see that maybe, if not this year's U18s, it'll probably be in the 2027 U18s where we're going to see these kids really impact. But their 06 class was known to be a little bit weaker. I thought, there's some, they'll find themselves again, but it's definitely a disappointing year for Slovakia, in my opinion. And then Germany was, I honestly thought that the first 20 minutes of them playing against the U.S., I thought they were terrific. Like, they really started this tournament with a bang. I thought they really played well, and then they just fell off the wagon. which is fine. I didn't think that German team was going to do anything of note. But they definitely didn't look as bad as what it looks like here on the standings. I thought Lewandowski, I thought was actually very good for Germany, and he will be a guy who I think will do well in the National Hockey League. Carlos Handel, I thought handled, pun intended, but handled himself pretty well. I think he's somebody who, looking into, next year and the years going forward, I don't see any needle movers or shakers coming out of Germany right now. Could there be some guys? Max Pankin was an 09 that played for them this year. Next year, I think you're going to want him to take a step forward. I thought he struggled. He struggled with the U18s last year, and then I thought he really struggled in this tournament as well. I think the level is a little bit too high for him, but he is kind of their elite prospect right now. So should he decide to, obviously he will play next year for the World Juniors for them, but I don't know that I see like this super great group coming out of Germany. So they might be relegated next year. We'll have to see what happens with, the teams coming in. I believe Norway is the team coming in for the 27 World Juniors. So I think Norway and Germany are probably going to fight for relegation again next year, and we'll have to see what comes out of that group. Let me get a drink here, and then we'll talk about Group B here in Canada. Canada, obviously, went to the bronze medal game. To me, this was, Canada's chance to really kind of prove to the national stage that they're back. You had too many NHLers to not be in that gold medal game, in my opinion. You had guys coming from all sorts of walks. I mean, they could have had Celebrini for crying out loud. Obviously, he was never going to play at the World Juniors this year, but like you're talking about guys that were really high-end players. And for whatever reason, they just couldn't get it done. I mean, it's kind of the story and tell of the tape for Canada in the last few years. They just have not found that extra step to get themselves into a gold medal game, and that's their own fault. Like, obviously I thought Dale Hunter would drive them to get to positions where they should have been, and I think even some Canadian fans would say that there's some criticism with Dale Hunter in that regard too, because I don't know that he necessarily was able to change the mentality that's been had by Canadians. And maybe there's too much pride in Canada. Maybe there's too much ability to look themselves in the mirror and say that we can't be gold medalists every year. That's a Canadian question that's uniquely Canadian, and something that they got to look at internally and say, how can we make these kids better? Because we should be the best country in the world every year because we are Canada. But that is that's something they're going to have to qualm with. But there's too many good players in this roster to not be the gold medalists, in my view. And that's their own fault. Then going here to Finland, I'll talk about Finland and I'll go into Czechia. But with Finland, I thought they acquitted themselves quite well. They were fighting to be a medalist, and they did exactly what they thought they would. Everybody valued the 07 class as being a weak class. Again, Finland has been really underrated in the last couple of years for the draft. Obviously a guy who I didn't talk about just now, but he was rated in the North American skaters, but a guy who I think should be way more highly valued than he should be. He's the top overager in my view, and that's Matthias Van Hanen. I thought he was terrific at the World Juniors. I thought he really showed himself quite well. A very good playmaker. Scoring, I think his scoring ability could be improved, but he's also young. Like he came into this tournament looking to improve his draft stock. He should absolutely be third round or higher. I have him in my first round, actually. I think he's that highly valued, in my opinion. I'm probably the only guy in the world that has him in their first round, but we'll see what happens going forward here. But he's somebody he's played really well at Everett in the Western Hockey League. The World Juniors, every stage he's had to step on, he's done very well, and he's managed himself very well, and he's become a very viable and important contributor at the Western Hockey League level. He's, close to leading in scoring here in the Western Hockey League, and, he's not even drafted, which is crazy. I would argue that last year even he was the best player eligible, and he wasn't selected in terms of guys from Finland. So, he should be the top Finn picked in my view, outside of Hemming. I think Hemming and sorry, my mistake there. It should be Hemming, Van Hattalo, and then after that, honestly, I think Van Hanen should go. I think there's a couple guys that I think are really impressive players, but Van Hanen to me has proven it time and again. I think, Finland has got a group here that's going to be really solid. And, you know, given what could happen next year, I mean, they may find themselves back in the hunt here. I think a lot of people, obviously you lose a veteran and Aaron Kiviharju, who's played in 3 World Juniors here. To lose him is a big loss. But obviously you got a lot of talent that's coming up in Finland. A guy like Lucas Santala might make the roster at 2027 draft eligible. He might make it next year. Franz Karjalati at 2028 draft eligible might make it next year. You got some high-end guys that are coming in, and there's a lot to like out of Finland. I think there's a lot that you can really be impressed by and a lot to look forward to if you're a Finnish fan. We'll get into Czechia here now. Czechia, I thought, really, they were very much the overachievers out of this grouping. They really bought in, and that's awesome to see, because in prior years we'd seen Czechia really not do well, not find their groove the way they should. But we've also seen through history when the Czech Republic and Czechia finds their ability to get their team together and get them all on the same page. I mean, they produce story after story after story, and they got great leadership there. I mean, Peter Sikora was a phenomenal captain for them. I thought he did really well in this tournament. Obviously, this talk of the tournament too was Thomas Galvas, the twice passed over draft eligible, in his last year draft eligibility, a 2006 born that just really, I thought, was one of the better defensemen in this tournament. Credit goes to him for what he's been able to do and how he really showed himself. A bit of a smaller guy here, I think he's like 5'11", 170. Found himself in NHL Central Scouting's European rankings too. So that's a credit to him and what he's been able to do. But, obviously he was kind of the darling of the tournament for those that had him passed over. He should absolutely get drafted this year. Whether or not it's second, third, fourth round, that's up to him. But he should be highly valued, and that's a credit to what he's been able to do is for himself and not letting the past draft gaffes of not selecting him, allow his game to be clouded. I think he did really well in this tournament, was a key factor for them getting into the rest of this tournament here. And then I thought, I thought their goaltending was really solid too. I mean, a lot of credit goes to their goaltending and what they were able to do. But they found themselves really competing well. Adam Banach, I thought, had a really good tournament too. It was good to see that, he was still able to really acclimate himself well. And he'll be a guy who probably finds himself in the National Hockey League, probably before he's 22, but he's, he didn't let his size deter what he was able to do as a hockey player. And that's a really good thing for them. Latvia here now, I'm going to talk a little bit about, with Latvia, they're going to be the team to watch too. I mean, Latvia has a grouping that is super, super solid. Their 08 class, I've been talking about them now for 2 years. They got a group. Like, they are really solid. They're got now kids with 2 World Juniors under their system, now have the ability to play a 3rd World Juniors next year, and then even a 4th after that, which is not very, very common at all. You might have one guy that has done that, but they might have 4 or 5 guys that have been able to play 3 or 4 times at the World Juniors, which is pretty impressive, and pretty intriguing to see that. So it's good to see that they were able to kind of acclimate themselves decently well as well. I would expect them to be probably in, depending on how the development of these guys and what they're able to do going forward, there might be a top 5 finish here for Latvia in the near future, which, if they were to get that would be massive for their country. I mean, obviously we saw how the Olympics impacted the growth within Latvian hockey. And for such a small country, similar to Finland, both countries really leveraged the heck out of the players they have. And they were both able to buy into systems that really understand, what it means to be, Finnish and Latvian, and these different smaller countries. They need to be able to have that buy-in. Germany's lacked that a little bit in the last few years. But a country like Latvia, a country like Finland, using smaller populations to develop these massively talented hockey players, they maximize every opportunity they can in their development, and that's a credit to both nations. And then going into another country here that's a smaller country, but I thought it was a little overmatched at this level, and that was Denmark. They were far and away, I thought, the relegation candidate. They obviously proved that over time. They were going to be the relegation candidate. The only real guy of note I thought played decently well was Kleibo. Mads Kleibo, I thought, was a decent player. But he had a lot to overcome. I mean, he just didn't have the roster around him. I don't think that group was really ready to be at the World Juniors this year. And obviously they did well at the 1A level, but I think Norway, even now, I think is a better team than what Denmark showed in this tournament. And they will be a candidate for, obviously, I don't even know if they'll win 1A next year. They might even not be promoted back. So we'll have to see. And then obviously, given the circumstances here, Russia might be able to step in here if the IIHF decides they want them back in this conversation. And if so, then you're going to open a Pandora's box here where Russia will get entered back in. Does that mean nobody relegates back up? I don't know. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see how they're going to manage that once they decide what they're going to do with Russia. Obviously circumstances will change given, what's been going on economically as well as, politically as well. But, we'll have to see what comes forward here. But there was, there was some intrigue there from the World Juniors perspective. Some of the top scorers, I'll talk a little bit about it here. I didn't mention Wojtek Sihart, but, another guy who I thought played really well too. He scored a lot, but the only time I noticed him was when he scored. So I don't know that he did more than score in my view. But he's the guy who I thought, obviously you scored 12 points in a tournament, you're gonna open some eyeballs, and he definitely opened mine for sure. And then some other guys. A lot of people really like Jack Berglund's performance. I thought he was somebody who he was a darling in a lot of people's eyes. Obviously, you look at guys like Gavin McKenna. Viggo Bjork had a really good tournament for draft eligibles. Gavin McKenna, to me, is still the number one prospect, no question. Ivar Stenberg played really well. As you know, he's definitely my two. Galvas, like I said earlier, was really impressive. Cherenko, I thought, did well as a draft eligible. And some other guys here. Obviously, the top guy for Germany was a little guy in Dustin Vielhoft. He won't make the pros just because it's hard to be 130 pounds and make the pros. But that's a kid, and I don't think he does enough dominance-wise to really make the NHL at that size, but he will be an excellent EuroLeague player one day. It's just a matter of where his game will go. But I think he will be an excellent EuroLeague player one day. But that being said, I'm going to stop sharing here. I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about some other thoughts in this draft class, where I think guys are at, different things I see in this class. I kind of have a view that the Swedish class is pretty impressive this year. I think the Russian class is super impressive this year. Both countries have a lot of really good draft eligibles. Canada is going to have a pretty loaded class. I think their OHL class this year is pretty impressive, good depth as well. Western Hockey League is quitting themselves quite well. As far as the Q goes, there's a few players I think could be first rounders, but it's hard to say whether the depth is there, but that's always the question with the Quebec Maritime Junior Hockey League. But, overall, I think, NCAA shows really well. I mean, you're going to probably have 6-7 guys from the NCAA that are going to be in the first round. Obviously we talk about guys like, McKenna, Verhoff, Morozov is a guy who definitely will be a first rounder. Tynan Lawrence, I think, will absolutely be a first rounder. Oscar Hemming is definitely showing to be a first rounder. So there's 5 right there. Probably another guy that'll slip in. It just depends on how people view, some different guys at the college level. The USHL losing Lawrence, I think, was a big thing for them. To me, I think the 2 guys that could sneak into the first round from the USHL level will be Blake Zielinski and Cooper Solar. Both guys are Americans that I think acquitted themselves quite well at the USHL level and should find themselves as fringe first rounders. As far as some other guys, Philip Novak is a guy I didn't really talk about. I think he's a little bit highly, he shouldn't be as low valued as he should be. I've had him as a first rounder all year. I think he's starting to get into that first round conversation. Done pretty well at the Czech Pro level. Some other guys we could talk more about it in other videos. But as far as non-traditional guys, looking on my list here, I didn't talk a lot about him. But Nicholas Aram Olsen from Norway, They're going to be promoted next year to the World Juniors. To me, he's probably a top 15 player. I have him at 10 on my board. Definitely somebody who is going to be a very good National Hockey League player when it's all said and done. His brother, William Wilson, who's a 2028 draft eligible, will probably also be playing at the World Juniors, and both of them are very impressive hockey players. Some other non-traditional guys. Obviously, Lavia is a couple guys this year. Smeets I talked about earlier. Oliver Sperniks I've talked about on this channel before. I think another guy from Norway that not a lot of people are talking about, but he will be a guy who, the adept draft person will draft him. And that's Simon Kaspersen Sneelsberg. Had a major injury in his D-1 draft year. Now coming into his draft year, played to start the year at the U18 regional level in Sweden, and now has moved on to the U20 level and has done really well there as well. He's fighting an uphill battle, but he's somebody who, in my view, should be picked with a mid-round pick, and will be seen in a few years as the guy who should have been gone higher. And then Beck Sultan Makish, playing for Windsor, Kazakhstani-born kid. I think he's somebody who I have a lot of time for as well. He'll probably be closer to a third or fourth round guy, but really high-end skill. Good shot. He's slowed a little bit in his offense just because I think he's had a pretty rapid ascension similar to Morozov. But he's a little bit smaller, might struggle a little bit to acclimate to the pro level. Still has a lot of strength to build. Long-term project with him. A couple of Russians that we can get into future videos. I've talked about them on the channel before. And then, there's some other guys I can talk about, but I've talked now for an hour and 20 minutes, and, I'll probably leave some room for some questions here. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them on the side. If not, then, it'll probably be the end of this video. So, some future things I'll do on the channel. I'm going to do kind of the best prospects around hockey, regardless of age year. I'll probably get into some guys. I won't talk as much about the 26 class in that one. I'll probably talk more about, some kids that are, guys probably 14 to 17 years of age, guys that I think could have some NHL upside, and have shown themselves to be developmentally and historically, production-wise, doing much better than most prospects their age. So we'll get a little bit of that. I'll probably do that in the coming weeks. I have it scheduled for the 31st right now, so probably do it then. So it'll be a couple weeks before I do another stream, but it'll be good to kind of get more stuff on the channel that isn't draft eligible related. I think a lot of people, want to know more about these young prospects coming up, and it's cool to see that that's the case. And then, after that, just if you guys have any ideas for content, feel free to leave them in the channel, in the chat below or on comments on any of my videos. I'll probably do some more shorts coming out of this as well. That'll come out in the coming weeks as well, just to fill some content. But that being said, no other questions. So, I'm going to log off here, and it was nice talking with everybody, and hopefully we will have some videos coming up, and look forward to chatting more with you guys as you're watching this video and in future videos. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel if this is your first view on it. I talk a lot about NHL draft prospects, international hockey, and a few other things, the niches of hockey, if you will. If you know somebody who's into this content, or if you're really engaged in the content, you watch this whole video, if you have, you probably should subscribe. But if not, tell a friend, let them know, and, want to grow this community out. Would like to get to 300 subscribers sooner rather than later. So if you can get it out there, feel free to do so. And, if you joined on late, thanks for watching. Otherwise, good to see you, and we'll talk soon. Bye.